Well, hello again, everyone. Week 3 is underway. Your first papers are turned in. Congratulations to you all who've made it this far. I know it's a fast pace. Hope that you're all still staying well. It was a real pleasure to Zoom with some of you one-on-one. We got some good work done, and it was just good to see your faces and get to know you. I like relationships in the classroom a lot, value that interaction, so it's just always a joy for me when I get to meet with you. Plus classes have been going well too, been having fun in there. For this upcoming week, the Plus class is going to work on some stuff for summary and on civil disobedience. If you're having trouble understanding civil disobedience, you want some more work on summary, you just want face-to-face interaction, please let me know, and I will send you a link to the Zoom meeting, and you can join us. That's 11 a.m. on Wednesday. So just send me an email, let me know, and I'll give you the link. For your first papers, for those of you I met with, I'm recording this early, but I'm assuming you probably took the things we talked about and ran with them. And I have at this point sent you revision notes, so that's pretty self-explanatory. For those of you I didn't meet with, if you got some more extensive revision notes and you have any questions about those, just let me know. If it's something you can email about, email me, I'll do my best to explain it. If it's something that you need to talk to me about, I have plenty of time ready to put aside for you, so just let me know if you need that. You can earn a lot of points with your revisions. If you just picked up some skills and you met the standards, you probably got a B. An 85, a straight B is standard for meeting requirements on work and college. If you went above and beyond and did the revisions, you worked your way up into that A category. And if you're happy with whatever grade you got, you don't even need to send the revisions. But I'm hoping that we can really model writing as an exploration, a really fun exploration. So if that's hard for you, meet with me. We'll see what we can do about that. So this next section coming up here for 2 weeks is on summary. You just came out of learning about the abstract and the concrete, practicing reading closely. Most of my comments, you'll notice in the last couple of weeks, have been geared towards getting you to read more closely and express yourself more clearly so that people know that you understand what you've read. I'm sure that some of you have found that you misread a little bit, or just missed things in the writing, and that you saw some of those. In almost everyone's journal, I noticed something and pointed something out to you, or noticed that you had picked up something that you'd never previously picked up in reading before. That's great. I hope that you, as you engaged with the ideas and got my feedback, that you took it not as me ever chastising or anything. I know it's hard to pick up tone over email. I just want to push you to think more deeply, and sometimes I'll push you in directions of things I don't believe in just so that you can think about them. Sometimes I'll confront you with my own beliefs, things that I've thought about, but you don't need to agree with those. The pushback, the back and forth, that's deep thinking and meeting people who disagree with you coming to fruition in the classroom, and that's great. That's exactly what I'd like to do in this class. So for the next section, these next 2 weeks are going to be focused on just civil disobedience by Thoreau. You'll notice that I'm only having you read 8 to 9 pages of it for the journals. The midterm itself, which is going to be due during the second week of this, so week 4 of the class, is just a summary of a 2 to 3 page section of civil disobedience. This 2 to 3 page section is going to be taken out of some later point in the essay, so not the first 8 or 9 pages. So I would recommend that you read and reread the whole essay. I think there's lots of great ideas later in the essay that you would enjoy to engage with, and you're welcome to do that in your journals if you did read the whole essay. But I realize that it's very long and very hard to read. It's going to take you time as you do your annotations for the first journal and respond to questions in the second, third, and fourth journals. It's just going to take you a lot of time to work through this because it's dense with ideas. So I would recommend, actually, if you can, if you're in the headspace for it, start on journals 3 and 4 for next week, this week, if you want. they're all tied to the same essay. They're all moving towards practicing and executing summary. So if you want to work ahead, that's open to you, and I encourage you to do that while you're still in the headspace of working through Thoreau's ideas. It's a very rigorous reading. I choose very hard readings to do summary with because I think, one, you'll have more ideas to engage with, and we're always going to end journals with engaging with ideas, actually making, hopefully making useful what you're learning in this class to your life, period, general as you live. Excuse me. But another reason I choose such a challenging piece of writing for you to summarize is that you're all capable of it. And I know people come into class every year not thinking they're capable of reading something this difficult. And we spend the time to work through it, and by the end, not only can they read, understand it, they can engage with it and even summarize it. And that's such an empowering feeling to know that when you see a hard piece of writing, if you're willing to put in the hard work, you can figure out whether it was well written or not. You can understand it and engage with it. And this skill just transfers to everything. You can think in terms of piecing together the ideas and summarizing it and pushing back against it or agreeing with it with everything. The news, movies, stories you read, other essays. It's just such an invaluable skill to have in your life. And this section's built out of the first, like I said, to move into the third section. The whole course kind of builds on things that you learn. The third section is going to ask you to read a variety of essays. They aren't very long, and most of them aren't terribly hard to read like this one is. But it's going to ask you to engage with 5 essays with ideas that you're probably unfamiliar with or ideas that you've heard of but probably haven't looked at as in depth as these people talk about them. You're going to choose 3 of those and you're going to put them in conversation. And you can't really do that well unless you understand what they're saying. So we're going to get your summarizing skills down stat. Because it'd be so heartbreaking for you to get to that essay, connect ideas, and realize that one or more of the essays you wrote about you didn't even understand, right? So we're moving into this really foundational skill of summarizing right now. And you all can do it, and you will do fine. I'll be here to help if you need to meet over Zoom. Plus class will be working on this in live meetings. And actually, from what I've seen of your engagement with text so far, a lot of you are already really good readers and already know how to summarize. Some of you have done debate. Some of you have just had jobs where you've been required to read and summarize hard things. And that's great. If that's the case for you, then practicing summary in these next couple weeks should be pretty easy. It should be less work than normal. You can kind of relax a little bit, take a step back, spend less time on this class. It's going to get kind of rigorous after this section, probably a little bit more work. So just enjoy these 2 weeks if summarizing is easy for you. And I want to push you to engage with Thoreau. He speaks about our government, America. He's one of the first people to speak at length and criticize the way that the government is forming as it's forming. And some of his ideas are ideas that people still believe about our government and push forward to have through our laws on a day-to-day basis. So he's just been such a deeply influential writer, and he understood the consequences of a democratic government so well. I know that might sound dry to some of you, but we're all part of this thing called the American government. And a big part of this class is asking you to think about what you believe, what you support, even if you don't think about what you believe. What are you supporting? Most of us are born into a family that has political beliefs, and we adopt those. And it's so maddeningly hard to come to terms with how complicated politics are that it's just easier to stick with what our family believes and recite that. Maybe the things you believe you'll continue to believe after reading this, maybe not. But read this closely and challenge your ideas. It's just a very hard, very interesting exploration of what we sacrifice when we participate in a government and what we get out of a government. So try to be motivated by that. It's going to be interesting to all of us at some point. I know the older that we get, the more politics seems important. You have kids, you realize that there are consequences to laws, and that the way that you raise them is shaped by the government that governs you. So this touches us all. Look at my notes here. Yeah, I think that's about all I have to say about that. I do want to speak to a couple of the documents we'll be reading this week, just to get some things cleared up. So I'm going to speak about the summary notes and examples, which is at the very bottom of this week's assignments under the major assignment. It's the very last link. It's a PDF. Go ahead and pause the video and pull that up so you can track along with me. I'm going to pull it up on my laptop, so I will break eye contact for a minute. I'm just going to highlight a few things off of it. So the summary note starts with 10 rules for summarizing. Those are self-explanatory. Read them for yourself. Let me know if you have any questions about them. It's just a base for you to have as you're going through summarizing. Here are the rules that you can come back to if the summarizing gets confusing. Like, these will ground you. And then I highlighted underneath those the notes about how to structure a summary. Every summary, as you're going to see in the examples in this document, has a topic sentence, a title. It has a topic sentence, is the first sentence. It has a title of the thing you're summarizing, the author's name, and then what you're arguing is the main point of that article. That main point can be complicated, but you still need to try to fit it into that first sentence. The rest of the body of the summary is going to be you proving that that's actually the main point. And then finally, you're going to conclude. You're going to recap your main point so that people can see at the start and end, this is the main point, this is why, and by the time you get to the end of the logic of why, you'll be back to the main point, right? So you end right there and cap it. Cap it with the main point. There's a little practicing summary guide here. You're going to be practicing summarizing in your journal entries for next week. So you can ignore this if you want, but if you're a go-getter, you want to start practicing summary right away. Here's just some guidelines for how. You don't have to do this part. Under that, we have the examples of summary section. And I'm giving you examples of summary that are based on the readings that you already know from this class. The first one is a example of someone who's a professional on Consider the Lobster. You'll notice in the rules that I say don't quote. Some professionals do quote when they summarize, and that's fine. I'm asking you, particularly in this class, not to quote when you summarize, because I want to see everything in your words. I want to see you track through everything and not rely on catchphrases from the article. If there's something that the author says that's a point that you need in your summary that they say really well and you want to include it and quote it, normally that's fine. Just for this class, I'm asking you not to quote when you summarize. So you can give that summary a read. In the first sentence, it says David Foster Wallace, the author's name, the article, when it was published, helpful, where it was published, also helpful for this particular article, as you all already know, because that context shapes what he says, right? And then they spend a number of sentences arguing for the main point, and then they recap it at the very end and tell you the main point and what the point of it was, right? Exactly follows the rules from above. Then you'll go down below and notice that there's some summaries of Souls on Ice, which you read for last week. There's bad examples, better examples, and best examples. And in one of your journals, I'll be asking you to go through and list out which of the 10 rules each example meets and doesn't meet, so that you can see why a good summary is a good summary, and why a bad one's a bad one. And then you'll notice at the very last example I've highlighted Dodie's name. I'd speak about that in the journal. As you're reading through this before you're doing the journal entry that asks you to look at that, you can just ignore it. It'll come into play in your journals later. Summarizing is pretty straightforward, but it requires you to develop the skill to find the main idea, right? Most authors, almost all authors, have the main idea of whatever they're writing in the first the first paragraph of whatever it is, an article, essay, whatever. It's usually in the first paragraph. That doesn't include literature, right? Summarizing a story is a little different. But I'm just asking you to summarize these articles and essays. And those almost always have the main point stated somewhere in the first paragraph. You might not see it at first because you don't know the idea. By the end of the essay, you're familiar with it. You go back to the start, read the introduction, you're like, oh, the main idea was right there the whole time. So be looking for that, even in civil disobedience as you read. The main idea for the entire essay is right there at the start. I'll be asking you to summarize a small section with its own main idea, right? But the main idea for the whole essay of civil disobedience is right at the start of civil disobedience. So feel free to set up a Zoom meeting if you need to talk to me about summary, if this is really hard for you. One of your journals has you writing a summary so that I can correspond with you and give you pointers. That should be pretty helpful if anyone has any issues. The one more thing I want to do before I kind of end this video, it's probably going to be a little shorter this week, is read the first paragraph of civil disobedience and work through it. We need to have a really strong base. And in class, I always work through the first paragraph of civil disobedience because very rarely does someone understand that whole paragraph. Usually people's first reaction to reading that first paragraph is, Thoreau's an anarchist. He hates government, he wants to tear it down, he hates America, he hates what we stand for. And it's just simply not true. He says strongly worded things, but he says them in very complicated ways. It's easy to latch on to one sentence and say, oh look, he's an anarchist, look, he hates everything. But a more patient reader, as I'm asking you guys to be this week, will see that his ideas are very nuanced, and they're still important ideas. So go ahead and pause the video and pull up civil disobedience, and I'm going to pull it up right now, and then we'll work through the first paragraph. Okay, and one more note on civil disobedience before we get started. I ask you to read the first 8 or 9 pages for your journals, and that does not include the first actual 2 pages of the document, just the title page and then the copyright information. Those don't count. So start reading in the very first paragraph and read 8 pages after that, right? 8 to 9 pages of the actual essay. So I'm just going to go ahead and read the first paragraph out loud. You can follow along. And then I'm going to work through sentence by sentence. We'll try to understand what it means, name a main idea, and then hopefully that'll give you a good footing for going into the rest of the essay, okay? So let's go. He says, I heartily accept the motto, that government is best which governs least, and I should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. Carried out, it finally amounts to this, which, also I believe, that government is best which governs not at all. And when men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government which they will have. Government is at best but an expedient, but most governments are usually, and all governments are sometimes, inexpedient. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, and they are many and weighty, and deserve to prevail, may also at last be brought against a standing government. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. The government itself, which is only the mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool, for, in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. Cool. So let's go ahead and work through this. First note, you'll notice that Thoreau, like many people in this time and earlier, referred to humans in general as he. They use that masculine pronoun, man, mankind, right? We kind of just have to give him the pass on that because people like Virginia Woolf, who really made the push to get people to speak outside of just masculine terms defining everything, didn't come around until almost 100 years after this was written, about 70, 80 years after this was written. So that just wasn't in public thought at the time. But just in case you were wondering, it's Thoreau speaking in those masculine terms because no one had questioned it to that point. Let's get into the first sentence. He says he accepts the motto, "The government is best which governs least," and he should like to see it acted up to more rapidly and systematically. So right off the bat, idea number one for Thoreau, he thinks that it's a good idea that government is better when it's doing less. Weird idea, right? Why? That's just why is it better? Why have a government if you don't want it to do much? Weird, huh? That's where he starts, and that's what he's going to explain. He says, if you act on that, carried out, if you act on this, then this other thing that he also believes will happen, that government is best which governs not at all. So he says, government's best when you govern least, and then eventually when you're governing least, you just stop having a government at all. And this brings straight to mind a question, why do we have government? And you can think of reasons, right? We have government to organize all the things that we don't want to do ourselves. We get jobs in America, we do them, and other people do jobs, and we compartmentalize how we live. You probably don't plant and farm and eat the food you make, you buy it. You work a job to make the money for that. You don't dig your own ditch for sewage, you pay the government to take care of that for you. You don't pave the road in front of your house, the government paves it and you pay a tax for it. That's generally what government does. Thoreau's statement right off the bat is, we need less of that, and if we all had less of it, eventually the best thing would happen, and then we'd have no government. It's a weird line of thought. Let's explore why he says that. He says, when all men are prepared for it, that will be the kind of government they will have. Government is at best but an expedient. So what's an expedient, right? Look up words whenever you don't know what they mean. An expedient is something that makes a process faster. You expedite something, right? Maybe you've seen that in terms of shipping, expedited shipping. You make it the fastest it can be. So he's saying government's job is to make things fast and efficient. But all governments are sometimes inexpedient. So the government's job is to be efficient. Do you believe that's true? I think most of us would like that. He says all governments are sometimes inexpedient. Sometimes they aren't fast. They aren't efficient. And I know you can just watch the news for 5 minutes and find someone complaining about how the government isn't efficient. And I bet you all have examples from your own lives of the government taking forever to do something for you, right? Of course, the government's huge, taking care of tons of people. Of course, it's not fast. It gets made fun of all the time for filling a bunch of jobs people don't need to have. That's debatable. That's not something I want to talk about right now. But he's understated his point, right? The government often gets looked to as inefficient. So let's continue. The objections which have been brought against a standing army, and they are many and weighty and deserve to prevail, may also be brought against a standing government. So, what's a standing army? I'm sure some of you know, maybe some of you don't. A standing army is any army that exists in times of war and in times that aren't war. So, at the start of America, we had militias that got put together. There was no standing army. The militia got put together to fight the Revolutionary War, and then the immediate proclamations of the government when the Constitution was put together stated that there would not be a standing army and that every state would have a militia, and if a war needed to be fought, all of the militias would join to fight that war and protect the country. That very quickly got overturned, and we very quickly had a standing army. So we just had an army built and trained all the time, even when we weren't fighting. And Thoreau's saying here that the objections, the downsides to having a standing army are the same downsides to having a standing government. So a government that's there all the time, even when you don't want it or need it, right? So we're tracking with Thoreau. The standing army is only an arm of the standing government. So this one, pretty straightforward, right? The standing army is run by the government. So the government runs the army. The army only exists because the government wants it to. The government has power through the army, right? If there's a standing army and a standing government, the people do what the government says because the army, this includes maybe police now because they federally enforce things. But the army, the government, the police can actually enforce laws upon you, right? Physically force you to do things. The standing government itself, which is the only mode which the people have chosen to execute their will, is equally liable to be abused and perverted before the people can act through it. And here's the crux of Thoreau's first paragraph. Thoreau's really concerned about the perversion of the government. Whenever the government does things that are illegal and gets away with it, the people in the positions get away with it because they're the ones who control the power. They control the armies. They call the shots. If they abuse it, they abuse it. You're not going to stop them. If they lie and say they didn't abuse it, they can send a policeman or a guard, National Guard officer, or the army, whatever, to your house and arrest you. So that's one of Thoreau's main concerns, right, when the fledgling American government's starting to grow and gain power. Let's see. And then, think what the last sentence here, he says, "Witness the present Mexican War, the work of comparatively a few individuals using the standing government as their tool." Right again, so very few people want something done, they can call the shots. For in the outset, the people would not have consented to this measure. So Thoreau's argument is that the people, all of the people, if they got to vote on whether or not we'd engage in the Mexican-American War, he says the majority of people would said no, let's not have this war. But since a very few people felt that they could get something out of the war, that they wanted to have this war happen, they got to call the shots. It's still the same today, right? The president gets to declare war, nobody else. They don't put it to vote. No one votes over whether a war starts or not in America. One person makes the call. And if that person's advisors have an agenda and he listens or she listens to them, then we're probably going to war. It's a very, very, very small circle of people who get to decide what wars America fights in. The people fighting in the war because of the draft, right? We have the draft now. I'm sure any of you above the age of 18, I'm not sure if this is for women as well, but at least for men, you get a draft notice in the mail when you turn 18. All of a sudden, the government, if they need you for any war they declare, they can draft you. They can send you a piece of paper that says you've been assigned to go to the army, into this platoon or whatever, and fight in this war. And it doesn't matter if you believe in the war or not. If you don't go, you get court-martialed and put in prison. It's a very serious offense. Something that you might end up spending the rest of your life in jail for, which is crazy for not wanting to go to war, I think, but maybe you disagree, that's fine. So these are the kind of things Thoreau's concerned about, though, right? Why do you think he says that it's better to have no government? He's just laid out for us some of the downsides of government. Some of the downsides of government are the government, once it's in place, has to be followed, so they need an army. And once they have an army, they can force you to do whatever they want, even if you don't want to do it. And he's like, that's not nice, right? So he has this idea right here in the first paragraph that it would be better for there not to be an army. And he doesn't explain that in this paragraph, right? This is just an introduction of his main idea, that it would be better for people in America to not have a government. And then he spends the rest of this essay, pretty lengthy essay, discussing why he thinks the government will be abused and how he thinks it's possible to exist without a government. So that's what we're working with for the rest of the essay, right? And then at the end of this paragraph, he even talks about why he starts writing this essay in the first place, the Mexican-American War. Texas, what we know now as Texas, and then a lot of Southern California, New Mexico, down there, that was all Mexico when before Thoreau started writing this, shortly before, right? That was all Mexico's land, that wasn't America's land. American settlers moved into those areas that were already inhabited, and then at some point decided that they'd like it to be part of America. And Texas was pretty controversial, as was New Mexico, because the people who lived there already had their own forms of government, and it was their land, and they had joined Mexico. They were actually literally already a part of the country Mexico. So America, a few people in power listened to the voices of those who lived in those areas and wanted to be American and not Mexican. and they saw in some place like Texas especially all of the potential for to have cows raised there, right? Oil and such things very much abundant there. And they decided to declare war on Mexico in order to expand America. That's how we got Texas and some of the other southern states. But it was the choice of very few people, and Thoreau's claim, which he's probably right about, is that if put to a vote, Americans probably wouldn't have declared war on Mexico. They didn't need to go to Mexico and fight and die to take that land. Some people definitely would have, right? But it wasn't something that was completely necessary, and it wasn't something that most people probably would have voted to do. So this is the kind of thing that Thoreau's reacting to, and it's now one of our oldest dilemmas in the country. If you're drafted to war, and this came highlighted hugely in the Vietnam War, in the Vietnam time, people thinking about war quoted Thoreau tons and thought about his ideas a lot, is what's your responsibility? Is your responsibility to serve your country and fight and kill other people no matter what? Or is your responsibility to think through whether or not you want to fight and then go to jail if you have to? That's rough, right? Thoreau actually does go to jail, and he writes about it in this essay for doing things that he believed in, and you'll have to work through whether or not you think he's right, wrong, silly, smart. He writes very interestingly and has a lot of cool ideas. I'm interested to see how you all react and what if you agree with him or disagree with him. But I wanted to get this first paragraph pinned down and talk about it a little bit. He goes on to say things like he's not a no-government man, right? So he doesn't believe that we should just get rid of the government, that there should be chaos and anarchy, and that we should all fend for ourselves. He thinks, he's not dumb. He knows that that's not going to happen. He's talking about an ideal. He's saying ideally, if we minimize government in these ways, maybe someday humanity will be prepared to not have government, and then he explains why he thinks that would be good. So I hope that helped you guys out. I know that that's pretty heady. I wish we could do it in class and that you guys could go back and forth and talk with me. If you want to address this in class, this didn't help you that much and you want to work through it with me, let me know. I'll get you signed up for the Plus Hour. We're going to be talking about this in the Plus Hour, 11 a.m. on Wednesday. So, a couple closing notes. We'll wrap up the video. Like I said, feel free to contact me, Zoom with me. If you can't make Plus Hour, you need one-on-one work on summary or on reading this essay, I'm available. I'll help you out. Most of the time in my in-person class, people who don't understand this essay work through a paragraph or two with me or with the rest of the class in a group, and it just clicks. And it's a bit of work, of course it's a bit of work, and it gets easier with time, but it clicks and they're able to start putting sentences together. Because remember, every paragraph contains a main idea, and then all the sentences in that paragraph relate to that main idea, right? So you're trying to expand that idea, explain it, prove it, whatever the purpose of that paragraph is. And in summary, you are stating the main ideas of the paragraphs, proving that you picked the right main idea, that's really important, and then adding all those paragraph ideas up, and then there you have the big essay, and you can name what the overarching idea is, right? So you'll notice that, last thing here, you'll notice that you're going to be setting up a time to take this test. It's actually timed test. There's a forum where you can sign up for time slots to take this test. This is how it'll work. You'll sign up for a time in that forum for next week, so you don't have to worry about that yet. Anytime next week, you could take it on Monday, you could wait until the end of the week if you want to, that's totally fine. Take your time and prepare. I will email you a PDF of a 2 to 3 page section of civil disobedience, and you will have 1 hour to write your summary. Follow the instructions on the prompt I give you and write a summary. At the end of that hour, at the end of that 60 minutes, you will submit that to the assignment box on the Moodle page as a PDF or a Word doc. And I'll give you a 5 to 10 minute grace period to submit it. You'll have a full 60 minutes just to write it, and then a few extra minutes to submit it. If you get really stressed out on timed events and you need extra time, you can, one, contact the disability services. They'll have me fill out an official form, which will grant you an extra 30 minutes to do the assignment. If you don't want to go all the way through the disability services, but you are still concerned that you'll get stressed out and this is hard for you to do a timed assignment, contact me personally and we'll see if I can grant you some extra time and help. Well, that's everything for this week. I hope it was all helpful, and I look forward to seeing how you guys respond to civil disobedience. Goodbye.